G'day guys, Mac with the Outer Circle. Just a quick one in the morning today. Scale. I've been warning about the scale creep. We saw it with the Praetor that was released for the Sons of Horus, and we're seeing it again with these guys. They are huge, the pair of them. Even with this tilted forward running stance where they are actually slightly shorter because their body mass is not entirely vertical, it's slightly leaning forward. They are still huge. It has me a little bit concerned. So, how huge are they? Well, they're about this huge. As you can see, the new Tartarus Praetor on the right is literally heads and shoulders above the old Tartarus Terminators. This is a bit of a problem because the Tartarus Terminators, everyone has them. And if they don't have them, they have the Cataphracti Terminators, which are the same height. And now you have power armored guys on the left who are bigger than Terminator armored guys in the middle. Significantly so. And Terminator scale is one of those things that Games Workshop's always struggled with. The Marines had caught up to Terminators by 2nd edition. With 3rd edition going into 4th, they brought out a new plastic Terminator kit, which is more or less the same Terminator kit that we have today. That's where they went from being on a 25mm base up to a 40mm base. And, well, back then it was okay. You see, back then, it was 20 years ago. And what people sort of neglect is that they say things like, the scale has always changed. You know, Marines from Rogue Trader are tiny. If you have to go back to Rogue Trader to prove your point, maybe your point's not very good. You see, back in Rogue Trader, scale, fluff, the works was all very different. Maybe let's just only go back as far as 2nd Ed. And we can say that Marine size has been pretty damn consistent. I know I'm holding a literally 2nd Ed Space Marine in front of me right now. Size has been pretty much consistent from 2nd edition all the way through to 8th edition of 40k. The Space Marine character series that released in those little collectible boxes, they were remarkable in that they were slightly bigger than the other Marines were, and it was a slight scale change, and people noticed that. Well, going into these guys, we can see a significant scale change. And my big question is why? I know some people think they're easier to paint. I think we've thoroughly debunked that stupid statement on the show. You have the same level of smaller details, and the areas that have been increased in size are not the areas that really have anything to do with detail. Things like a slight 1mm lengthening of the torso midsection, for example, is not going to dictate the sort of level of detail you're picking out. Same as the fact that, yeah, they have the same scale Mark III shoulder pads and Mark IV helmets and whatever, just on a slightly taller body. Well, how can they be easier to paint if they're the exact same fucking size, you retards? People are idiots in this hobby sometimes. And so you see this kind of scale change, it's like, what a dumb idea. I get it with revamping a new edition or something like that of, say, 40k and creating the Primaris Marines. You're creating a new range. Okay, with the Chaos Space Marines, they slightly increase the scale. Doesn't look like it's anywhere near the extremes that this is, but that slight scale increase kind of worked there because it wasn't too many kits that they really had to change up. Havocs, regular Chaos Space Marines, some new characters, and that's kind of where it ends. The Horus Heresy isn't like that, though. The Horus Heresy has the problem of you have at least 2 special units for every single legion. Then you've got the characters for every single legion. You have the generic stuff that the legions share, so whether it's guys on foot, whether it's guys on bikes, whether it's guys with jump packs, all of that stuff has to be changed now. So you see the problem here. It's not 2 or 3 kits in a range, which is, again, like 40k Chaos Space Marines, quite easy to do. It's not a new range, like in the case of the Primaris Marines, where it's an all-new version of something being brought out. This has the problem of having to fit into an existing range with existing upgrade kits, existing characters, and existing specialist units. Your specialist units in Forge World already suffered from things like slight bit of resin shrink, and could be slightly smaller, like a millimetre smaller, than plastic counterparts. Well, this is only being exacerbated here because how damn big are these guys going to be next to the old school kits? This is where my problem lies. It's not so much in scale. I mean, if you want a new bigger Marine and you think, oh, all Marine proportions sucked, and I don't think so. I think they were pretty good because Marines shouldn't be lanky. They should be very squat because armor makes you wider, not taller, by the way. But yes, my problem isn't with that. My problem is with the fact that people already have a huge, vast range of armies. There is already a vast range of equipment out there, specialist units, etc. for legions. Once you start down this road of scaling things, then you have to change everything now. And it's taken 10 years to get to what we've got, let alone rescaling everything. That's my problem. To the idiots who like to say things like, well, not all Marines should be the same height. Yeah, that's great. Why would I have now a tall squad of Marines next to a short squad of Marines and things like that? It doesn't make sense. You're not having minor variations in height. You're having large head and shoulders above the rest, two different scales within the same army. It doesn't look right. And that idea that, I can have different scale Marines in the same force, and it suggests that they're individuals with different heights. That only goes so far as the two different heights you have on hand available to you. So you're an idiot if you think that. Feel free to tell me why you're not an idiot in the comments below, and be swiftly ignored. Give you a further idea. This is a Primarch next to one of his Terminators now. And notice that Terminator is not up on a large plinth like Rogel Dawn is. That Terminator is most of Rogel's height. Basically, if you remove Dawn's head, he is the height of Rogel Dawn. The shoulders are coming to the same points. That's insane. That has completely destroyed the scale of Marines next to their Primarchs in the Horus Heresy. So, I don't know what the net gain there was. So, continuing on with this point, I thought, how big are these guys if I put them next to my own Space Marines? So I quickly took a photo out in the shed. It's not a bright photo, it's a very dark photo, so I apologise for that. But you can see some of my destroyers. Moritat on the left and a Legion Destroyer on the right. Both of these guys are shorter than the new Praetor. And this is made worse by the fact that my guys are standing on fucking rocks. Okay, the mountain that they're fighting on, they're clambering over rocks. You can see the Destroyer on the right. And the Moritat himself from Forge World comes with a tactical rock built into the base. Well, the guy that's coming out, and if you don't believe me, measure the 32mm base from one side to the other. That'll tell you exactly how tall he is. He's big. And he's so big that you notice his feet actually touch basically rim to rim each side of his base. The Moritat on the left has almost the exact same pose and doesn't even come close to achieving this. That is how much extra size, but again, spread out over the entire model, there is. The detail is not easier to paint. None of that's easier, but you now have a taller model for it. A millimeter here, a millimeter there, it all adds up by the time you get to the head. And I don't want to put a model into my army, like this Praetor in the center, who is going to completely clash with the tone and style of the army. And again, I apologize for the terrible pictures, but you can see what they actually look like in the showcase videos I did on them, but I don't want to include this guy. He doesn't look right. And that's what it comes down to for me personally. So they've introduced an unnecessary scale creep into the system in order to sell new models. That's really all it comes down to. There is no net benefit being passed on to the consumer. Some people might say, oh, well, the scale works better now. I do not want lanky Marines. I think the scale is objectively worse for that reason. Armor is thick and wide. Okay? A helmet on your head is going to add to your height, the height of the thickness of the helmet. But the armor you're wearing on your arms and legs is going to add the thickness of the armor on each side of the leg for both legs, on each side of the arm for both arms. That's a difference of 4 times width versus 1 times height. You're going to naturally look more squat in armor. Don't believe me? look up what soldiers, especially knights, medieval knights, look like in their armour and what they look like without it on. And you'll see that very tall, skinny people suddenly become very stocky looking individuals. It was the same with Space Marines. Their scale never worried me. The only thing that Marines in Horus Heresy have to measure up to for scale was things like the Solar Auxilia and the Imperial Militia. Well, the Solar Auxilia were sculpted in a larger scale by Edgar Skomorowski, who did it because he felt like it, and they were a personal kit project for him, not something that was going to be introduced into the game, but the higher-ups saw it, liked it, and said, let's use it. And other than that, the Marines scale perfectly to one another, to all their equipment and war gear. And what's going to make this worse is that, let's say I introduce this guy to my army. All of a sudden, the guys who are crewing my vehicles, things like the Basilisk loaders, for instance, or the loader in my Minotaur, those guys are going to look awfully short all of a sudden next to these other guys. And the vehicles in 40k already suffer from the fact that every vehicle they make is dramatically undersized next to what it's supposed to carry. Classic example is, how do you fit 10 Marines in a Rhino? How do you fit, Terminators in a Land Raider? How do you fit 25 Marines in a Spartan? Well, none of this is being fixed by increasing the scale of your regular Marines. So if you think there was a problem with the scale before, congratulations, it's just been exacerbated. Lastly, I'll talk about this. So I made a reply here to a person, and they said, I quote, "I've been a fan of Space Marines since all the way back in the original Road Trader, which, when compared today, are tiny." Again, if you have to go back to Rogue Trader, it's probably not a great argument. But I think as a community, we get too hung up on things and forget that change is inevitable. No one is forcing us to use these new models, invalidate what we already have, etc. Well, I'll put an asterisk there as well for the viewer. You're not being forced to use them in that they're not forcing you to buy them. However, going forward, when they're all that is available, if you want to play the game, it's going to make it a lot more difficult to not being forced into using them. You're being coerced in that direction. He goes on to say, whilst Games Workshop do produce the models, fluff, rules, etc., what happens after that is down to us, the hobbyist. Don't like the current edition? That's cool, there are older editions you can use. Not a fan of the new scales? Plenty of old models being sold on eBay or trading groups, etc. To a degree, he's right. You have the ability to go back to a previous edition. But as I've spoken about before, all you're doing with that is splintering the player base by forcing them to pick between different editions of the game, which is not something that is ideal. And it makes it very hard if you have a preferred edition, for example, and you want to go play in a local gaming store. What if the person you play against doesn't like that edition? What if they take exception to that edition? Where do you fall within that? Maybe you like 3rd edition 40k, and someone goes, I want to play my 3.5 Space Marines. Technically, they were designed to work in that edition. How much of a purist are you going to be? There's problems with going down that route. I'm not saying it's a bad thing and you shouldn't do it. By all means, play the edition and whatever that suits you best, but it makes it very hard to go into the environments where the hobby is at its greatest potential, such as going to a community event. If the community event is the current edition of the rules, which most will be, it's going to be very hard to go in there and dictate to them that, hey, I want to play with my old rules from this old edition. When it comes to buying old models, yes, you can, but how many Betrayal at Kelth boxes are you seeing on the internet these days? Maybe one every couple of weeks might pop up for an exorbitant price generally. That's just one example. Once something is gone, it's very hard to get a hold of. What about Praevian Consul, Narek Dragur, or Ortelion Score? Some of these previously released Heresy miniatures which are just gone. What about all the stuff that went last chance to buy? How many Death Corps of Krieg armies with the old resin do we see? Actually, let's use an even better example. What about the Teleran range that Forge World released? Does anyone remember the Teleran range that Forge World did? No, that's right, you don't remember it. That's how rare they are. So it's a very poor excuse in my book. He then goes on to say further, I for one appreciate these newer models. Yes, they're big, but they also look awesome. Will I add them to my current armies? Most likely not, for the same reasons you give. Will I start a new army though? You bet I will. Well, that's what the company wants. they're big and they also look awesome. Yes, but they don't look more awesome because they are big. I think that's something that's being very, very quickly brushed over by the community. Is that, and I mean, I agree. I think they look good, but they don't look good because of their size. They would look good whether they were shorter or taller than the current range, or maybe the exact same fucking size, like they should be. He then lastly finishes up by saying, let's all take a step back, enjoy what is awesome, and accept the change. Whether we like it or not is inevitable. And I just responded very, very succinctly to it and said, and that right there is everything wrong with the fanbase. You're just taking negative change on the chin and rationalising it as a way to soften the blow for yourself. And make no doubt, guys, that's exactly what's happening here. People look at what's happening in the community, and they look at these negative things that Games Workshop does, and they try and find ways to explain it away, like this person has. Like, oh, yeah, it's a scale change, and yeah, I mean, it doesn't fit into my army, but hey, you know, I can just create a new army. It's like, well, no worries. And I'll cut my dick off to prevent rapes. What the fuck are you talking about? It is a negative change. It does not make the hobby better to introduce a new scale into the game. I think we can objectively say that at this point, okay? Now, for some people, they prefer a larger scale. That's nice, that's a preference, but it doesn't make the game better. It might make the miniature on some weird level easier to paint for you. I don't get it personally. I've measured the miniatures. I've spoken about it in previous videos and proved that there is such a small change on each part of the Marine's proportions that it's a nothing sum for the average painter in comparison to the size of the human that's painting the model on their brush. The problem is when you put that model down, all those changes add up by the time you get to the full height of the miniature and you put it down next to another model. It looks absurd, especially with these, what I'm going to call lanky Marines. We shouldn't be having to rationalise this stuff. There shouldn't be a scale change, or if they wanted to introduce one, make it a more subtle one, where Terminators aren't the height of Primarchs, where guys in power armor aren't towering over the existing Terminators. And trying to use previous editions as an example of it, of where it's been done, is pretty poor logic. Oh, well, you know, in the past they've changed scale. Yeah, in fucking second edition. Second edition was 1994. So we basically had 27-year run of Marines being a certain size. They introduced 32mm bases back in 2014 as a way of letting Marines breathe a little bit more on the small 25mm bases they had. And they'd had since forever. They sort of realised it too, and they went, well, yeah, okay, they're a bit big, they overhang the edges of the bases, let's do something about it. And now they've created a new Marine scale which has returned to that exact same issue, where the Marines are now overhanging the bases again. To me, this is not a positive change. Now, I'm not saying it's completely negative either. Okay? And this is where the nuance comes in. I call it the outer circle paradox. The outer circle paradox is if I'm not 100% positive about something, I'm ultimately 100% negative about it. That is the only way the internet can react. At the end of the day, these miniatures are not a net benefit to us who are in the hobby. Now, going forward, for new people entering the hobby, perhaps. Okay? But I have to put a big asterisk on that perhaps, because of the same problems I've already mentioned previously in the video. If you introduce a new scale change now, what already exists does not fit. And for some people, it is not an issue. It is such an infinitesimally small issue that Marines have two different scales in their army. But for the majority of people playing Horus Heresy, I think I can safely say they do not want multiple scales within the one force. It just looks a bit too weird. And things like vehicle versus infantry ratios, which are already skewed pretty heavily in favour of the infantrymen, is going to skew even further, where Marines, especially Terminators, are going to be looking comically huge next to their equipment. Don't think I'm Nostradamus in predicting this one. And the last thing I want to leave you with was essentially the person's response to this comment I made. can be boiled down to, at the end of the day, they're just toys. And just doesn't that tell you everything you need to know? Because like I've mentioned before, if at the end of the day they're just toys, go before a judge in court and say that. They're not just toys, they're a item, a good or service that was bought with money. And it comes under certain rules, and it is not immediately treated as something lesser simply because of the fact that it's a toy. It doesn't matter what its end goal is. It was paid for. And anyone who has a Horus Heresy army, like me, I have a destroyer company. Destroyers, most of the army, are resin miniatures, and they're not huge miniatures. If anything, like I say, they're infinitesimally slightly smaller than the current plastic Mark IV and Mark III power armor. If I go and introduce these guys to that army, any of these new Praetors, even if they're sitting flat on the base, they're not up on rocks, they are going to look so much bigger than the rest of my force, it's not funny. So, to me, completely unusable, and I think it's going to be the same for most Horus Heresy players. Now, that said, if you don't care about it, great, you do you. I'm not here to tell you what you can and can't have and enjoy. The only thing I won't put up with is being told that something that is bad is good, and being told that, hey, let's just ignore the fact that something is a bad change, because it's happened anyway. I don't agree with that approach. I think it's worth talking about, even if people disagree with me. Anyway, I'm Mac with the Outer Circle. I'm sorry that this was the video you get this morning, but I just had to get it off my chest. And I wanted to do my getting started in Horus Heresy video first, but that's falling on the editing back burner because of this sort of stuff. And I mean, this isn't the only thing happening right now, but this is the one I chose to focus upon, and just this one issue. I'll see you all next time.